journalists talking about this guy, all the journalists here, if you see a journalist talking about this guy, it means that his mouth is open to say something good about the president. On this case, no problem. But journalists of opposition, if you say something bad, directly jail. There is no place in jail now. Our central jail is full of people, full of opposition people, full of many people, those who want to work. Yeah. And during this work, protest work, they caught 237 persons, 37% sent to the jail. Yeah, on Saturday. 237. Yeah, people want change. Because legally, what the guy is doing is not good. He did free mandate, normally two, but he did free. And he wants to do one more. It is illegal. This is only what people do not want.
Arrests, protests, and power struggles. Africa's young people are once again taken to the streets, challenging systems older than their parents.
And nowhere is the tension more visible than in Côte d'Ivoire, where pre-election crackdowns are intensifying. Activists, journalists, and opposition figures have been detained as President Alassane Ouattara seeks another term in power.
The voice you heard from the clip we just played was of a journalist in Abidjan who spoke with Global South World on condition of anonymity, capturing the anxiety in the streets ahead of the October 25 elections. You are watching World Reframed. I'm Ismail Akwe.
And I'm Duncan Hooper. Today, we dig into Africa's shifting political landscape, where a new generation is pushing back against entrenched power. And the numbers show why the old order is trembling. And for a change, we're live. Partly because we want to get the episode out before there's any more news developments to pack into it. So if you want to shout out, please let us know you're watching in the comments or share your views and I'll pick them up at the end. Also, if you want to stay on that long, I'll explain how you measure a government's popularity in a country where the people cannot speak freely.
Well, let's begin in Madagascar, where weeks of youth-led protests have now reshaped the country's leadership. The military has stepped in after mass demonstrations forced the government to collapse, a scenario both celebrated and feared, Duncan.
Yeah, and the demographic backdrop's really important here. Over 60% of Madagascar's population is under 25. This is something we're going to come back to again and again in this episode. And the youth unemployment hovers around 14%, although the reality is that informal joblessness is much, much higher. And this is a generation that's growing up amid economic stagnation and, frankly, political fatigue.
Well, that's sadly the truth because the protests began over rising prices, corruption, and poor governance. But unlike past uprisings, this one was digitally coordinated. TikTok, WhatsApp, and Telegram, they became the protest grounds.
Let's have a look. So that's the scene on the streets in Madagascar, and now the military seized control. And here's a piece of trivia for you, Ishmael. The elite unit which intervened to transform this protest into a national event is called CAPSAT, and they're a much respected and sometimes feared setup. But do you know what that name stands for?
I have no clue about that.
No, that is 1 second, and I will tell you.
Mm-hmm.
It stands for the Personal Administration and Technical and Administrative Service Corps. I guess with a name like that, you have to be pretty tough to be taken seriously. I mean, it's not like the UK. We've got the Special Air Services. America, they've got the Navy Sea, Air and Land teams. And in Madagascar, they have the Personal Administration and Technical and Administrative Service Corps.
Ooh, that's quite a lot. And anyway, the new leader is promising to be sworn in as president this Friday. But it's a long line of precedents that military resets in Africa often begin with hope and end in disillusionment. Remember Mali? Burkina Faso and Niger. They are close to me. I'm in Ghana. They all saw similar youth support for initial coups, and I mean there's still some support though.
Yeah, and that's the paradox of Africa's Gen Z revolutions. They often start with democracy's language, but then they end up under the boots of the military. And we'll come back to the Sahel at the end. But now to Cameroon, where the world is waiting for official results of a tense election. Paul Biya, at 92, has ruled for 43 years, making him one of the world's oldest and longest serving presidents.
And do you know he's the oldest head of state in the world right now? And were he to fall from power, that title would pass to King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, Saudi Arabia's king, who is 89. In turn, is just ahead of Norway's King Harald V.
Yeah, I mean, we saw an American election which was shaped by the age of the candidates, and well, Joe Biden, he was only 81. So has age been a big factor in the election in Cameroon?
Well, certainly, because the country abolished term limits in 2008, and there's nothing to stop the president ruling right up to his death. And there have been failed attempts through the court system to disqualify Biya because of his age. And just as Donald Trump frequently accuses Joe Biden's aides of governing with the famous auto pen that copies the presidential signature, critics say Biya's frequent absences mean his cronies get to rule.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough subject. Who's to say what age someone becomes unfit to rule? But on the other hand, there are many countries who impose minimum ages to stand for elected positions. So perhaps there's a case for doing something at the opposite end of the scale as well. I'm going to ask that in the comments. I'm going to put that in right now. And if you do have a thought on it, please share it. In the meantime, Ishmael, take us back to Cameroon.
Well, going back to the main challenger for Biya, Issa Chiroma, he is 76 years, has already claimed victory and called on Biya to concede before the results are even released. That bold declaration has electrified opposition base and agitated the ruling party. Do you have that clip, Duncan?
Yep, let's have a look.
First, I want to say thank you to the Cameroonian people. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for believing in us. Thank you for believing in change. Thank you to all who voted and to all who protected their vote. You are the true hero of this victory. My gratitude also goes to all the men and women who fought this battle before me. Without your work, we would not be here today. For this, I say thank you. I also thank the candidates who have already sent me their congratulations and recognize the will of the people. Their gesture honors our democracy and marks the beginning of a new era where the unity of the opposition and the civil society becomes an irreversible force. I want to say it with gravity and simplicity. The people have chosen, and this choice must be respected.
Yeah, so that's really, really strong words. And Cameroon's youth make up around 65% of the population. The median age there is 18, but political participation remains low, and that's really a result of years of repression and disillusionment. I mean, if you work it out, Biya's been ruling since, what did we say, Ishmael?
Well, that's 4 decades, 43 years since 1982.
Right, so back to 1982. So that means that the vast majority of his people were not even alive when he came to power. And you could see then why they might think the electoral process is a bit pointless, perhaps even. But online, the young voices are growing louder.
Yeah, and we have hashtags like Cameroon Decides and Time for Change. They are trending, especially among the diaspora in France and Canada. And that online energy often translates into political pressure at home.
Yeah, but if we put aside age and let's look at the big picture and some of the numbers, since Biya took power, Cameroon's per capita income has risen. So it's gone from about 732 dollars per capita to around 1,700, which is, you know, there's definitely a gain there, and it looks good until you realize it's really quite a long time. And I think if we take a sort of extreme comparison and we look at China, right? So back in 1982, China's GDP wasn't that different per capita, about $203, but now it's more than $13,000. So it's just way different. And if you take into account a couple of the other neighbors, So that's Nigeria and your country, Ishmael, which is in purple. They've both been on similar trajectories, Ghana as well. So the overall number tells us part of the story, but the truth is that it's the inequality which really causes the discontent. Inflation, youth employment, regional income disparities, they are high.
And those economic frustrations often ignite political fire. Whether Chirome's self-declared victory is legitimate or not, it signals something deeper, a collapsing confidence in electoral credibility itself. Now, back to Cote d'Ivoire, where instead of change, the gates seem to be closing. President Alassane Ouattara, now 83, appears ready to consolidate his control.
Yeah, the final list of the presidential candidates that was released last month reads a little bit like a political filter, it seems. So we have the former Credit Suisse CEO, Tidjane Thiam, he's been barred. The former president, Laurent Gbagbo, he's been barred. Both disqualified on technical grounds, but of course many see that as political engineering.
Yeah, and these guys are very popular, and the government has intensified its clampdown on dissent. Human rights groups report dozens of arrests of activists. In just the past month, independent journalists are also being questioned or detained.
Yeah, and this is happening in a country that's been relatively stable since its civil conflict ended. That was back in 2011. But the numbers show rising anxiety, and the youth unemployment there is at 12%. We're seeing these double-digit figures across the countries. And the economy is growing, right? It's growing quite well, 6% annually. But it just doesn't deliver the opportunities that young people want.
Yeah, we shouldn't forget about the generational contrast. Nearly 70% of Ivorians are under 30, yet they are being governed by an elite class from a political era that began before they were born.
Yeah, and that's just the same story. We're just telling it again and again, Ishmael, I feel. The median age of the leaders on the continent, 63 years old, right? The median age of the citizens, 19. That's not just a generational gap, that's a legitimacy gap.
So what we are seeing in Madagascar, Cameroon, and Cote d'Ivoire is the same tension playing out in different forms. Youth want inclusion, leaders want endurance.
Yeah, and when the institutions, the democratic institutions, fail to evolve, young people, they look for new paths, and that's protest. It might be through social media mobilization. It can even be support for the military interventions, just to get that change that looks like it's going to bring us a quick fix.
And indeed, the data is telling us that this isn't just a passing trend. Africa's population is expected to double to 2.5 billion by 2050, while the young people making up the majority, if their political energy isn't absorbed through legitimate systems, the streets or the barracks will keep filling that void.
Yeah, it's really a demographic revolution that's waiting for a kind of political translation. And the question is now, who's going to listen? Back at the top of the show, Ishmael, you might remember, we were talking about military rulers, and I promised to explain how you can measure the popularity of a government where people just don't feel they can speak out freely. Because, of course, even if you say to people, look, these results are confidential, no one's going to know what you say, they don't trust you, they won't believe you. And, of course, the consequences for them and their families are going to be severe. So you say to them, no, do you think the military government, do you think they're doing a good job? And everyone's going to say, yeah, they're great, they're brilliant, they're doing a brilliant job.
So how do you cut through that, Duncan?
Well, you do something that's called a list experiment. So basically what you do is you split your survey group into two, right? One half, you give them a set of statements that are not political, not at all sensitive. So it could be anything like, I own a car, or I play sport each week, I grow my own vegetables. It doesn't really matter as long as these are not controversial. And you ask them how many statements they agree with. And they'll say, I agree with 2 statements, or 4 statements, or 8 statements. The other half, you give them that same list of statements, but you give them one more, which is a political question. Like, do you think the government is doing a good job? And again, you ask them how many statements they agree with. And if you've done this right, and you've done your homework and you've picked the right sample, you can look at the difference between the two groups. And by doing that, you can work out the answer to that final political question that you added in without any individual actually having to answer it themselves.
That's quite clever.
Yeah. That's what these statisticians do. And this is the method they used in Mali shortly after the military coup. And it found that although about 74% of the population said they supported the government, when they did this list experiment, it showed significantly lower support. I mean, down at 63%. So that's quite a big gap between what people say and what it seems like they actually believe. Although it does have to be said, that's still a pretty strong approval rate.
That's quite,
frankly, we don't know how that could have evolved since.
That's quite fascinating, and it will be very interesting to conduct that kind of experiment a few years on and see how it evolves. This has been World Reframed. Keep up with the latest on all the stories we discuss on globalsouthworld.com. And until next time, stay curious, stay critical.